What's up, guys? Tonight we're reading disturbing and scary stories on Reddit. Turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin. A few years ago, my brother would get a call on his cell phone around 2 to 3 a.m. every night. He would answer and it was this hellish-sounding noise, like static mixed with screams. He changed his cell number after a month of this, and it stopped. Then after a week or so, it began again, the exact same noise, exactly at the same time. Finally, one day he decided to dial back the call. It was an old man that had no clue what he was talking about. Still, the calls persisted. If he didn't answer, it would call a few more times. No, messages were left. He decided to say screw it. Ended his contract with his phone company, switched to a new one, and then got another new number. You guessed it. The screaming static calls continued after a short delay. By this time, he was terrified every night, unsure why this was happening. He dialed back the number again and got a different person. Around this time, he lost his job and his phone. The call stopped, of course. His phone was disconnected now. So one day, my mom asked me to listen to this weird message she got on our home phone. It was the static screaming. We showed my brother, and he was freaking out. He dialed back the number again, and it said the number was disconnected this time. Never heard from it again after that. When my sister was young, my parents got her a personal phone, a landline so that she could feel special. Yes, she was extra spoiled. It was a prepaid landline though, so basically no one could call in or out if she ran out of credit, much like a mobile phone. Anyway, every night at 3 a.m. her phone would ring. She said there was a man on the other line, and she would get really scared and come running to my room. It escalated to the point that I asked her to disconnect her phone before going to sleep, because it was becoming extremely annoying to get woken up every single night by this person that called her. To be honest, since she was about 10, I thought it was just these stupid scary movies she liked to watch. Eventually, she just got rid of the phone anyways. A few years ago, we were talking about it, and she confessed that her phone continued to ring even after she disconnected it, which is why she said she didn't want it anymore. She has no recollection of what the person on the other end was saying, or maybe she's just completely blocked it out. This happened to a friend of mine. She told me about it a year or so ago. We'll call her Minji. Minji is in her late 20s and works as an English tutor in South Korea. One evening, a few years ago, she was tutoring a high school boy. They were up studying pretty late, and the buses stopped running. Being a long way from his house, the boy asked if he could crash on her floor overnight and get the first bus the next morning. Minji was very reluctant because inviting a teenage male student to stay the night didn't sound like a great idea, but he was begging her and eventually she relented. They went back to her one-room apartment and she got into the bed while he laid a blanket out on the floor, and they both fell asleep. A few hours later, at maybe 2 a.m., the boy wakes Minji up. "I'm really hungry," he says. "Let's go get some food." Minji opens her eyes and looks up at him in disbelief. "Food? Now? It's 2 a.m. Go back to bed." But the student insists, "No, I'm so hungry. Let's eat something now." She tells him that there's some ramen in the kitchen and he can fix himself. This doesn't satisfy him. He doesn't want ramen. There's a 24-hour place just down the road. Let's go there. Eventually, after several minutes of persuasion, the boy gets Minji to come with him to the restaurant. They leave the apartment and head out. As soon as they're on the street, the boy turns to Minji and says, "I'm not hungry. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked under your bed. There's a man sleeping there." They call the police and discover that a homeless man had been living in Minji's apartment, sleeping under her bed for over 2 months. The boy only saw him because he was lying on her floor, so had a clear view under the bed. The police arrested the man, and thankfully there were no other issues, but that's by far the creepiest thing that's ever happened to anyone I know. I read a story of almost the same thing happening to a woman who was alone in her apartment and saw someone under her bed before she hopped into the shower. She went into the bathroom, ran the shower, and climbed out of her apartment to call the police. When the police went into the apartment, they found the person, a man who appeared to be homeless, standing at her bathroom door with a knife. This story and the one in this thread make me never want to sleep on a bed above ground, ever. I remember a story a high school teacher told me that always stuck with me. My former teacher was home alone when she was a child. It was probably around the 70s. A man knocked on her door and she opened her main door but kept her screen door locked. He said he was from the gas company and wanted to talk to her parents. She told him they weren't home and he, without missing a beat, tried to start forcing his way into the home. When he found the screen door to be locked, he pulled out a freaking box cutter and started to cut through the screen. My teacher ran to hide in a clothes hamper in her parents' closet. She said she sat there for about 10 minutes before the police arrived. Thank God a neighbor saw everything and called the police or she probably would be dead. Also, to put the cherry on the freaking creepy sundae, they found the intruder hiding in the attic. She told us that as a cautionary tale to lock all doors and windows when home alone. Of course, naturally, I would go home from school to be alone for hours. Doom. My grandfather died last year, sometime when my son was maybe a year old. We had dinner with the whole family every Friday night, so my son had seen him several times. My grandfather was a very quiet, proud man, but when he thought he was alone or unseen, he would make silly faces at my son to get a laugh. A couple nights after his funeral, my son, who liked to crawl into bed with us in the middle of the night, started just laughing uncontrollably at like 2 a.m. So I get out of bed to see what's going on and find my son sitting in the middle of the living room in the dark, laughing. I say, "Hey buddy, what are you doing?" In toddler speak, he says, "Papa funny." I got a little nervous for some reason and went to pick him up and bring him to our room for the rest of the night. And as I'm hauling him away, he says, "Bye, Papa," and blows a kiss at absolutely nothing I can see. A few weeks ago, my girlfriend and I were sleeping together when I woke up to her saying, "What are you doing?" She sometimes talks in her sleep, but this sounded so coherent and urgent that it jolted me awake, and I asked what she was talking about. She then woke up and said she thought she saw someone at the end of the bed. Thinking it was just a dream or semi-awake hallucination, we thought nothing of it and went back to sleep. About an hour later, I woke up and saw someone standing on the bed with the sheets wrapped up and twisted to their neck. I didn't know what to do, but the first thing that came out of my mouth was, "What are you doing?" My girlfriend then woke me up. I had been dreaming the exact same thing that she did and said the exact same thing. I know it's the power of suggestion or whatever, but fuck that. When I was in 8th grade, I went on a school trip that was called the Louisiana Tour. It was mostly going around to significant sites in South Louisiana. One of the places we went was Myrtle's Plantation, which is considered to be one of the most haunted places in the country. There are all kinds of stories about the place, but at one point we were standing in a room as a part of a larger group, and the tour guide was talking about something, I don't remember what. As I'm standing there, I start to hear what sounds like someone hitting a piano key. After I heard it a couple of times, I started to look around for the source of the noise. I didn't see a piano, but I kept hearing it. So I asked my friends who were standing near me if they heard it. They said no. When I heard it again, I said, "There is it again," and that they must have heard it. They thought I was crazy. So I went back to looking around the room. Everyone's eyes were on the tour guide except for one woman. She caught my eye and pointed at me and then at her ear with a questioning look. I realized she was asking if I heard it too, and I nodded. At this point, the tour guide starts telling a story about a soldier who had died there and that he played the piano, and multiple guests had reported hearing him playing in the night. I honestly didn't know what to think. I guess I still don't. I talked to the woman as we were all leaving the room, and she had heard the exact same thing as me, but her husband and son had not heard it. I work at the Myrtle's Plantation, and I have so many of these stories and events that visitors tell me. The creepiest one, in my opinion, is that you can sleep at the plantation kind of like a bed and breakfast. Well, we have a room that is filled with those creepy ceramic dolls. There is one doll, though, that was one of the children's favorite, and always was in the bed with her at night. The child later died, and the doll stayed on the bed with her. When we started to house guests at the Myrtles, we kept the doll on the bed in memory of the child. The first night when someone slept in the room, they moved the doll to get more comfortable. In the morning, the doll was back in the bed with its hands on the guest's throat. She came out outraged, accusing us that we did something in her room. No one went in or out of her room that night at all. The next guest moved the doll as well, and when he was sleeping, he heard tapping on the wood floors. He woke up and noticed the doll on the floor where the sound was coming from. Everyone who stays in the room and moves the doll will come and go back in its bed. I posted this story to another thread a while ago, but this seems like the perfect place for it, and it's fairly short. So here it is. When I was growing up, one of my best friends told me about a very creepy situation involving him, his younger brother, and a man in the window. When my friend and his little brother were younger, they shared a bedroom. They're some years apart, but his younger brother was born with a multitude of different health issues, including multiple sclerosis, and he's confined to a wheelchair and cannot care for himself. So, to keep an eye on him overnight when his parents couldn't, they shared a bedroom. One night, my friend randomly woke up for no particular reason and happened to glance over at his younger brother, but noticed something very startling. A strange silhouette of a man wearing a top hat, looking in through the window behind his younger brother's crib. The first thing my friend did was jump up and turn the light on, then ran into his parents' room to tell them what he saw. When his parents came back into their room to investigate, his younger brother was having a seizure in his crib. A few of his family members say it was his younger brother's guardian angel standing in the window that night. My friend believes it was death. It's all still pretty unsettling to me. I have a similar story regarding a man in a top hat. When I was a kid, about 11, 12 years old. We had a bicycle storage in the backyard along the side of the house, which made a long and creepy dark hallway-like path. Every night, after being with friends, I had to open the storage to put my bike in there. And every night I saw this man standing in that dark hallway with his top hat, coat, and cane just staring towards me. Every time I saw him, I just ran as fast as I could into the house and locked the door. Even when I told my parents about it, only Mom believed me and followed me back once, only to find that he wasn't standing there anymore, of course. One day I actually managed to get this guy to leave me alone. I was kinda angry that night and was fairly unreasonable, to be honest. I was locking my bike as usual when I saw him. And once and for all I countered my fears and ran straight to him, only to see him disappear in the shadows behind him. I never saw that man again, and he hasn't haunted me since. I had totally forgotten about him until I read your story. It still gives me goosebumps when I'm thinking about it. When I was younger, I had an imaginary friend who lived in this massive antique dresser. We'd chill out, and I vividly remember him telling me stories, although I have absolutely no recollection of what they actually were. I remember one day talking to my parents about it. My dad traveled quite a bit, so he wasn't up to date with what I was into. When I started telling him about my dresser buddy, he wanted to know his name. It was something innocent, like Peter or Patrick, but I can still see him going white in the face. I drew Peter Patrick out for him, and the very next day him and my uncle took out that dresser and burned it. It wasn't until a few years later when I found out my dad's little brother also had the same friend with the same name who lived in the same antique dresser. After a few months of the typical imaginary friend shit, my uncle started having night terrors and couldn't sleep because of Peter Patrick. It got so bad that they had to move him out of his room before he managed to get back to normal. Skimmed through the comments and will probably answer the most common questions. First, the dresser was an ugly old dark wood thing. As far as we know, it belonged to my great-great-grandfather, who had always been into some weird shit if family history is to be believed. Second, Dad never talked about what was actually in the dresser, and he was the only one who believed his brother when they were kids. Their parents didn't really care because they thought kids were just being kids, and who honestly believed in spooky ghosts back then must have been a shock that 30 years later his own son started having the same friend. Third, my uncle's night terrors ended when they moved him to another room. The bedroom he was in with the dresser was converted into a little sitting room since it had some nice views. It remained relatively unlived until Dad moved our family into that home, and that room became mine. Fourth, I haven't seen my uncle in 14 years now, so I don't really speak to him since he is on the other end of the world. Afraid to bring something like this up since I know he struggles with depression and alcoholism, so I would hate to add stuff to his plate. Fifth, to everyone asking what he looked like, I remember a tiny old man. Not like an old man tiny, but kid-sized tiny. He had very large hands, long fingers, which in turn led to how I draw people even today. Hands always come out longer and larger than what they would normally be. Smelled of wood, mothballs, old cloths, and what I now know is mold. On a somewhat similar note, when my son was about 3, he had an imaginary friend in his room who he used to talk to all the time. He would tell us stories about things she would tell him, and we'd hear him chatting to her at bedtime. We thought it was pretty cute. After a few months, my son said he wasn't friends with her anymore. We figured he was over his phase of seeing her, so we're surprised to hear him still talking to her at night. Then he started not wanting to go to bed and having really bad dreams. At some point, we ended up asking a lot of questions about her. We had assumed she was a little girl, but apparently she was 47. She lived in the wall, and he stopped being friends with her because she wanted him to call her mummy. Her name was something like Margaret. She wanted him to come and live in the wall with her. He had told her he didn't want to talk to her anymore, and she wouldn't go away. We eventually moved house, and he stopped talking about her. Funny thing is, when I was pregnant with him, living in the same house, I used to have dreams about a lady sitting at a dining table in our bedroom, except it was obviously a different era, and the room was not a bedroom at the time. The lady used to knit and make me listen to her giving me parenting advice, while her 2 20-ish-year-old sons sat at the table quietly. You should have taken a sledgehammer to the wall to see if a body was in there. It reminds me of this doll my brother gave me after visiting Mexico when I was a kid. It was just a standard doll with traditional Mexican dress, and I immediately loved her and went to sleep clutching the doll. I normally did not have nightmares as a kid, and if I did, they were very tame. Nothing crazy. The thing is, as soon as I started sleeping with this doll by my side, I sometimes placed it near my dresser. I started having super violent, scary dreams where I or family members and even strangers would get harmed. I would wake up screaming sometimes too. I eventually told my mom about it, and her eyes immediately went to the doll, and she told me she would be throwing it away. I protested a bit, then gave it to her. After that night, the nightmares completely went away. Maybe it was a coincidence, maybe not, but it still creeps me out. About a couple weeks after I was born, my dad's best friend Jim died. They were really close, and one of the last things he wanted was to hold me a little before he passed. His wish was filled, and some short time after that, he was gone. Fast forward 7 years. I'm now a happy 7-year-old with a 5-year-old brother and recently born sister. One day the phone rings, and with my mom out and dad in the washroom, I thought it was going to be ignored, as we kids were still too young to answer the phone. No call display. We didn't know if there would be a stranger. But my brother broke the rules and answered. Hello? At this point, my dad is out of the washroom and is asking my brother to hand him the phone. He ignores him and keeps listening to whoever is speaking. Before my dad could ask a second time, my brother hangs up, looks at him and says, Jim says hi, and he misses my name, then goes back to playing. The look of shock my dad had is what I remember most about this. I'm pretty sure they lied about Jim dying and he's your biological father. Damn, I chuckled, then thought about it, and that's actually not a bad assumption. I feel like it'd be pretty shitty to tell your kid about his bio dad by only saying he was a friend that died. I also got a similar story. My best friend's dad is a Vietnam vet. One of his buddies from the war died 20 or so years ago. 5 years ago, he came home from work one day and had a voicemail on his house phone. It was a bunch of static, white noise, and then a voice that clearly says, "Hey, Miles." Only one of his buddies in Vietnam called him by this name, real name Dave. He's never had a caller ID, and I heard this myself when it happened. Still gives me the creeps. My brother is 8 years older than me, and had a childhood friend that was a few years older than him that died in a motorcycle accident. They used to play guitar together. I was listening to my brother ripping out a Metallica song, and when he got done, the amp got statusy and we both heard a, "Hey, dude." I was too young when his friend died to remember what his voice sounded like, but my brother said it sounded just like him. A few years ago, I was walking through the woods off the beaten track a bit, and I smelt this really overpowering sweet smell. Being nosy, I pulled back the undergrowth to have a look and found a dead body. The guy had clearly been there a while and wasn't looking great, all swollen and green and black with various runny bits. The local wildlife had also been dining well for a few days. I called the police, who told me to wait with the body until they arrived. Being in the middle of nowhere, it took a while for them to arrive, and it got dark, and I just sat there in the dark with him for a long time. It turned out he had committed suicide. For a long time afterwards, I had dreams about him, and he would talk to me and not nice things. Mainly about how he was angry I had disturbed his resting place and he wanted me to kill myself. Probably just my imagination, but all pretty disturbing at the time. He still turns up in my dreams from time to time, and no doubt will be tonight after typing this. For today, that's it. If you made it this far, thank you very much. Which of these stories creeped you out the most? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy the stories, don't forget to subscribe for more. Until next time, stay safe and don't look behind you.